So very briefly, before we go into the introductory remarks, we're going to have welcome remarks by WITSA CEO Dan Koo, and then we're going to have a brief session of introductions and overview by myself, Anders Halverson, and then we're going to have the feature presentation by Polciy, Vice President at CTA, and some Q&A. Just a quick set of house rules before we get started. This will be recorded. For everybody participating, kindly mute your mic when you're not speaking. Please be respectful, and thank you for your cooperation. So, Dan, a few welcome remarks from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anders, but most of all, thank you, Ed Briswa, Vice President of Policy at CTA, our Chairman of the WITSA Global Policy Committee, and also all-around good guy and our go-to person with regards to tariffs. And what an interesting, what, five or so months it has been?
Is that it?
Now, it's almost like 5.5 years.
Yeah.
So many things have changed that we need to have a quick update on what's going on around the world of trade and tariffs, because global tech trade certainly is one of two priority pillars for WITSA this year, and the other being AI. So with regards to global tech trade, it has we've not seen concern, uncertainty, and perhaps even down to fear of disruption as what has happened in the past few months. So any updates that we can provide to our members with regards to status quo or the latest that's happening. And again, these things happen so rapidly that we may need a third one pretty soon as well. But for this current update, we thank Ed for his time and his expertise. Certainly, his in-depth knowledge will, I think, stand us in good state as our members navigate the uncertainties that has come about with regards to tariffs and trade. With that, thank you so much, and I look forward to an interesting session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. So just a quick introductory set of remarks from me. As most of you will know, WITSA is an alliance of tech industry association from 80 countries and economies, founded some 40 years ago in 1978. We aim to drive transformation and grow the tech industry globally across all regions through trade, innovation, and advocate international public policies that advance the industry's growth and development through our position papers and in collaboration with internationally recognized organizations to promote and facilitate growth. Through our policy work, we advocate for reducing and removing trade barriers that limit the availability and increase the cost of digital tech. We encourage free and fair trade with minimal tariffs and non-tariff barriers, as is essential to growing tech and ensuring its benefits reach businesses, societies, and communities worldwide. We discourage protectionist measures that curtail the transfer of tech or artificially inflate the cost, undermine innovation, and put domestic businesses and institutions at a distinct disadvantage at home and in the global economy. A strategy rooted in competitiveness, not containment, will best serve everybody's interest in the digital economy for the future. We firmly believe that policies that restrict the global exchange of tech products and services slow down the progress and prosperity of businesses, economies, and societies. This webinar is a follow-up to our February webinar, How to Understand President Trump's America First Trade Policy, and our March webinar, What's Next for the World Trading System, featuring Alan Wolf at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I'm very pleased to welcome our feature presenter today, Ed Briswa. Ed is the Consumer Technology Association's Vice President for International Trade. He leads CTA trade and supply chain policy and advocacy work with a strong focus on improving the international trade environment and global supply chains to strengthen the competitiveness of U.S. consumer technology policy. Ed is also WITSA's Regional Vice President for North America and Public Policy Chairman. Ed previously served as international trade advocate for the American Chemistry Council and Information Technology Industry Council, and a trade negotiator in the Office of the U.S. Trade Representatives and Department of Commerce. Ed obtained 2 master's degrees from the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna in Austria, where he was a Fulbright Fellow, and from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, and has a bachelor's degree in the classics from the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. As a trade expert, Ed has received numerous recognitions, including by the Washingtonian magazine as one of Washington, D.C.'s 500 most influential people in 2025. Tariffs implemented during the second presidency of Donald Trump have marked a sharp escalation in protectionist trade policies in the U.S., with President Trump announcing a series of steep tariffs on nearly all goods imported to the U.S. On April 2, dubbed Liberation Day, Trump signed an executive order imposing a minimum 10% reciprocal tariff on all U.S. imports effective April 5th. Higher tariffs on imports from 57 countries, ranging from 11 to 50%, were scheduled to take effect on April 9th, but were almost immediately suspended for 90 days for all countries except China. The 10% tariffs remain in effect today. Excluded from the reciprocal tariffs are copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductor, lumber articles, certain critical minerals, and energy products, some of which are under Section 232 tariffs, national security investigation. On April 11th, electronic devices, smartphones, iPhones, laptops, etc., were exempted from reciprocal tariffs, but will likely be included in the semiconductor tariffs under Section 232. Trade negotiations are ongoing, with recent announcements including UK and China. On May 13th, the Trump administration formally rescinded the Biden administration's AI diffusion rule days before it was set to go into effect. The AI diffusion rule, which was introduced in January and set to come into force on May 15th, introduced limits on exporting US-made AI chips to many countries for the first time while bolstering existing restrictions. Trump's officials are drafting their own rules to replace the diffusion rule. They are not yet finalized, but could be issued in the coming weeks. In today's webinar, we'll focus on the U.S. tariff policy and actions under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, and Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. This session will provide an update on the ongoing trade negotiations, as well as an in-depth understanding on the goals behind these tariffs, their implementation processes, and the potential harms they pose to international trade and tech sectors. We will explore how these tariffs are designed to protect national security and economic interests, while also discussing the unintended consequences such as increased costs, supply chain disruptions, and strained international relations. We will also discuss what comes next in U.S. AI trade-related matters. Ed, it is a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, and we appreciate you taking the time to educate our members on what's next for U.S. trade policy. Following your presentations, we will open for a few questions as time allows. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Anders, and thank you, Dan, and the entire WITSA team for inviting me to speak with the WITSA audience today. And I'm really pleased to be part of the WITSA team as a board member and as the chairman of the North American region for WITSA. So, I wear many hats. So it's great to be here nonetheless. I have a presentation I'm going to walk through. And, this is a very dynamic environment, and, the slides are just really designed to help keep me on track because we could be going off into different tangents on a lot of these different issues. But, the one thing I want to say at the outset is that it's still, even for the best of us in the trade policy world, an incredibly challenging time because of how policy is being made. And it's top down. It starts with the president. It filters through all of his advisors. They want to implement as many tariffs as possible, and they're going to make adjustments on the back end. It's really hard to make adjustments on the front end before they impose the tariffs, whether it's 232, IEPA, or otherwise. And because of that, we're like in damage limitation mode for the most part. And trying to influence the offensive agenda is also quite difficult. Although I do think that USTR is more interested in hearing from stakeholders than some of the other agencies that we work with at the moment. Unless you're a big company, maybe the Commerce Department will hear from you, but if you're an association, it doesn't appear that the Commerce team really is interested in hearing directly from associations, at least the Bureau of Industry and Security. So we are trying to do our best in a very difficult and challenging environment, and I'm going to explain exactly what CTA is doing at the end of the presentation. So Anders, can we go to the next slide? So I want to start off talking about public opinion, as opposed to the nitty-gritty of what Anders gave an overview on. And we've been tracking public opinion for months and months and months, even before the president came into office, just on the attitudes of Americans on tariffs. I think during the campaign, there was a lot of polling that showed that people supported the idea of imposing tariffs to address unfair trading practices. Things have shifted substantially. I think because of the breadth and the depth of the tariffs and just the tariffs on, tariffs off, the uncertainty, the back and forth, Americans are souring on this idea of tariffs on everything. And you could see, I mean, we see new polling coming out all the time. So this is just one example that we found of recent vintage. So CBS News, 59% of those polled opposed placing new tariffs on imported goods. And I think Americans know that tariffs lead to price increases. So when we hear from the administration or even the Biden administration saying that there's no connection between inflation and tariffs, we beg to differ. I think Americans understand that there is a definite connection between inflation and tariffs and how tariffs do lead to price increases, both with respect to imported products and those made domestically when domestic manufacturers and producers increase their prices due to greater protection. So there is a chunk of the American populace that say the tariffs are reasonable, but almost half say they've gone too far. I think the president himself is losing a bit of credibility on his handling of the economy because of all of the chaos around the tariffs. And this is late May. Maybe things have changed in June, but 53% disapprove handling of the economy in late May versus 36% when he took office. So, however, I'm going to caveat all this. Until there's like massive uprising against the tariffs, we're not going to see a lot of action out of the Congress. And the Congress really, in our view, needs to take a very substantial role in reclaiming the authority it's provided to the executive branch to take it away from the president, take his toys away, and have the adults use this in a more responsible way. The court system obviously is engaging here with the CIT, vacating the IEEPA tariffs, both fentanyl and reciprocal. And there's another case in the DC District Court that also found against the tariffs. But this is going to be an ongoing process. Maybe the Supreme Court agrees with the CIT. We're not going to see a resolution to this for some months, but at least for now, I think we're stuck with the tariffs, even with this opinion changing in the negative. So let's go to the next slide. So Anders kind of hinted at all this. I'm not going to read through this. I think we all know that the 10% baseline tariff is in effect, but there's negotiations with what I have heard is 22 countries. The administration publicly says either 18, the president said 15 yesterday, but I'd heard from USTR that it was 22. They are on I think it was June 2nd, they asked for final offers. It was June 2nd or June 4th, final offers from these countries. And then they're going to continue to negotiate. But yesterday, Scott Bessent said that July 9th date could slip for the countries that are negotiating in good faith. And he did actually cite the EU in his remarks when he was testifying on the Hill yesterday. So it seems like the reality of trying to negotiate all these deals in 90 days is pretty stark. It's almost impossible to negotiate substantial, comprehensive trade deals, period, in that amount of time. And it looks like what they're trying to do is just set up frameworks for how future negotiations would proceed. If that's how you read the framework deal that they negotiated with the United Kingdom, which was very light on details, soft on commitments, but had some interesting nuggets in there. So, my personal opinion is that this 10% might stick around, but it seems also that it's negotiable. Howard Lutnick, in his uh, testimony last week, up in the Senate and then in the House, almost indicated that it's possible to negotiate that 10% away with the right commitments. And so that's what we're pushing for, is if you actually use these tariffs as leverage, if the tariffs are leveraged to negotiate with our trading partners to eliminate barriers to trade, when you eliminate those barriers to trade and you get to a deal, get rid of the tariffs. Don't leave them in place for all time in the future. We don't really know where the administration is going to land on this, but they are projecting anyway that the tariffs are going to be a permanent feature of the U.S. economy. We do not want to see that. For China, I think it's a different matter. We saw that they reached another agreement, which in the parlance of trade negotiators, I think is a framework to implement the joint statement and the Trump-Xi call. So it's really about implementing the commitments they already made, but we have not seen the text of this framework yet. We hope that comes out very soon. For the time being, it seems that the 30% fentanyl and reciprocal tariff for China is staying in place. The president mentioned 55%, which we think means that he's also including the 25% tariff on lists 1, 2, and 3 under Section 301. The Section 301 actions from the previous Trump administration that were continued under the Biden administration. So that's how we got to the 55%. China is keeping its retaliatory tariff rate at 10%, and both sides are de-escalating on the non-tariff barrier retaliation. So for the U.S., perhaps reducing retaliation on its chips export controls only if those happened after the trade war started this year, and then for China, allowing export licensing applications to go forward for the next 6 months for permanent magnets and rare earth elements. The administration also seemed to have said that they are going to allow Chinese students to continue studying in the United States, which was a pretty big step that they were going to take in terms of retaliation. We'll see what this looks like in the text. I mean, the devil's going to be in the details. So, but for the rest of the world on July 9th, if there are no negotiations, it's very likely that the reciprocal tariff rates that were introduced on Liberation Day will come back into effect. Or there might be different tariff rates. They could be lower. Again, we don't know. The administration is saying they're sending out letters to everybody else in the world saying, here's what you get. It's like they're the Oprah of the tariff world. You get a tariff, you get a tariff, you get a tariff, you get a tariff. So it is, they're just dealing tariffs to everybody. Now, whether there's going to be future negotiations with the rest of the world, I don't know. It doesn't seem like they have the patience for that, or the bandwidth, or the scope, or the staffing. But again, we'll see. I personally think that the idea of tariffing all these least developed countries is heinous. And we shouldn't, as a country, be doing this to poor people around the world. But that's where the administration's at, is that they want to harm poor individuals in the least developed countries as a part of their trade policy. So let's move on. There are exceptions to the reciprocal tariffs, and this is outlined in the April 2nd executive order. I don't want to dwell on these too much. The most important piece for our industry, the Consumer Technology Association, is the fact that semiconductors are accepted from the reciprocal tariffs, mainly because they will be part of they are part of a now ongoing Section 232 investigation. And it's not just semiconductors. There was a separate memorandum that came out that clarified that a good number of HTS codes for the purposes of the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs executive order were also considered semiconductors. And these were downstream consumer technology products like smartphones and laptops and tablets, for example. So we put out um, a white paper explaining this because there was a lot of confusion that this was an exemption from the reciprocal tariffs for all eternity. It's not the case. We do think that for $383 billion worth of trade, at least they're going to get hit with a 25% Section 232 tariff. The exceptions missed out on a lot of consumer technology trade as well. So it didn't cover $422 billion in imports from around the world into the United States. And that includes some major categories of consumer technology, most prominently being video game consoles. So if the video game consoles don't get accepted from the reciprocal tariffs and the China tariffs eventually come back on, they are going to experience a much higher tariff and potentially a higher cost increase as well. So what we don't know, however, is for this Section 232 investigation, if the Bureau of Industry and Security is going to tariff the finished good or the content, the semiconductor content in the downstream products. The steel and aluminum tariffs that are in effect, they also cover derivatives, and they might cover more derivatives in the future. It seems anyway that for derivatives, the tariff will be on the value of the steel and aluminum for Section 232, but it was when the tariff rate went from 25% to 50% for steel and aluminum, the administration also said that the remainder of the derivative product is subject to the IEEPA reciprocal tariff. So the remainder of that product, if it's not steel and aluminum, will still be tariffed with whatever reciprocal tariff rate is in effect, whether it's 10% or a higher rate after July 9th. We had Liberation Day on April 2nd. I'm calling July 9th the son of Liberation Day. So it's kind of like a schlocky horror movie. So, there's other things that are accepted from the reciprocal tariffs. We could see more Section 232 investigations in the future. This is what we keep hearing. Commercial aircraft, there's an investigation. We commented on that. I think they're going to go after textiles and apparel. They may go after, other manufactured items in the United States. We just don't know. But, Secretary Lutnick keeps hinting at more Section 232 investigations. This is a major tool for the administration, especially if the courts eventually throw out the IEEPA tariffs entirely. They're going to use Section 232 in a more robust way. So let's go to the next slide, Anders. I think you skipped one. Oh, yes. Now, Canada and Mexico and China are a little bit different from the rest of the world because they have these fentanyl tariffs on them. Canada and Mexico, the reciprocal tariffs don't cover them. Now, the fentanyl tariffs, it's 25% for non-USMCA compliant imports. So if your product qualifies under the USMCA rules of origin, you can import that duty-free into the United States, except for, if it might also be covered by, certain other Section 232 actions. There's a very complicated stacking approach to how the administration is administering these tariffs. And I think I have a slide on that as well. So the only exception here is for Canada, 10% for Canadian energy and potash, as I've been hearing from the Canadians, not potash, but it's also critical minerals. And that's if it's non-USMCA compliant. For China, I've already talked about this. You've got the 10% or the 20% fentanyl tariff under IEEPA. It originally was 10%, but went up to 20. And then the Section 301 tariffs stack on top of that. So whether it's list 1, 2, 3, or 4A, they all stack on top of that 20%. And any other Section 201 tariff also stacks. Anti-dumping, countervailing duties, MFN, they all stack too. So let's go to the next slide. So for this slide, we're using the language of the Court of International Trade in its ruling, and they're terming the reciprocal tariffs as worldwide reciprocal tariffs. So, I've been saying 10%. The 10% is a universal baseline tariff because that kind of matched the Trump campaign's rhetoric. But what the CIT found in a recent decision was that the tariffs exceeded the authority provided by IEEPA to regulate importation. So the CIT vacated the tariffs entirely. However, they've agreed to a stay of the tariffs, and so the administration immediately appealed the tariffs to the Federal Circuit, and the Federal Circuit has also issued a stay. And this bottom part is a little bit out of date, but it was just announced that the stay is going to continue through the end of July, which means that the tariffs can stay into effect. So that means that the tariffs will stay in effect after Son of Liberation Day on July 9th. So it doesn't mean that the Federal Circuit disagrees with the plaintiffs. It means that they're just allowing the tariffs to stay in effect for now. They may have bought into the administration's argument that the tariffs are important for their negotiations. It's possible, but they have not ruled on the merits yet. So it's still possible that the Federal Circuit could agree with the CIT. There's another case that the administration lost at the DC District Court that's also being appealed, and that's under a different timeline, a different appellate court, and I don't have as much information on that. It seems like the CIT case is moving much faster. The one thing we need to know here is that the CIT ruled against both the reciprocal tariffs and what they're calling the trafficking related tariffs. So this is what I say, the fentanyl tariffs, Canada, Mexico, and China. So all of those tariffs will be vacated if the Federal Circuit agrees and if ultimately the Supreme Court agrees. We think that no matter what happens at the Federal Circuit, there's going to be appeals to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will have to rule. So this is going to take many more months. We've argued at CTA, and our CEO, Gary Shapiro, was crystal clear about this in comments to the Wall Street Journal earlier this year, that the IEEPA tariffs have been illegal and unconstitutional. And this is what the court system is saying as well. So far, and we'll see what the appellate courts say. So let's go to the next slide, Anders. So steel and aluminum tariffs, I've already talked about this a little bit. It's now 50% for every country, imports from every country, except for the United Kingdom, which got a sweetheart deal of 25. Because we have a special relationship with the United Kingdom, they get 25. Now, I do think that there is very cursory language on this in the Economic Prosperity Framework deal. And I think the US and UK are still negotiating on the steel and aluminum element to that. So perhaps by July 9th, that they could reach an agreement that lowers that tariff rate from 25 to something else. It passes prologue. I think there will be a tariff rate quota. This is what the first Trump administration agreed to with a lot of countries, and they got rid of all those quotas. This administration, but they might negotiate new tariff rate quotas where outside the quota it'll be a much higher rate, and within the quota it'll be a lower rate. We'll see what happens with the United Kingdom, and that could set the stage for negotiations with other countries as well. But the most important thing I already mentioned here is that the steel and aluminum content is being tariffed, not the entire product value. So it's only the value of the steel and aluminum, and this is like for the whole product. The rest of the product gets subject to whatever other tariffs exist, reciprocal or fentanyl. And then exceptions, and this is where I talked about this with the stacking. So the steel and aluminum tariffs are not any products subject to the steel and aluminum tariffs are not subject to the reciprocal tariffs. So any Section 232 tariffs on autos, those autos are exempt from the steel and aluminum tariffs. And then goods subject to the IEEPA tariffs on Canada and Mexico are exempt from the steel and aluminum tariffs. And if your steel and aluminum in your product that you're trying to import was melted and poured in the United States, then that content is exempt. So they're trying to provide a preference for US content in all of this. It's very, very complicated. And for small businesses, and CTA has 80% of our members are small businesses, trying to understand this is very difficult. And we're constantly doing member education and bring people up to speed so they can make the best possible decisions. This is really tough stuff. And I think it's going to get a lot harder because, in my view, the administration could use this approach to semiconductors or copper or critical minerals or any other Section 232 action it takes. So you're going to have to know the value of the content ultimately if they decide to impose tariffs on the covered content as opposed to the full product. Let's go to the next slide, Anders. Yeah, so autos, this is for our autos members at CTA, we do have a lot of auto members. This has been an absolute killer. And if you include the steel and aluminum tariffs on top, it is incredibly, incredibly difficult for them to navigate because a lot of auto companies do import steel and aluminum for manufacturing purposes. It's not necessarily just in the product they're trying to import. So, they're supposed to create a process for including additional auto parts under the scope of these 232 tariffs. We haven't seen that process yet. We have the process for steel and aluminum that's ongoing. CTA is going to be commenting on that process next week. But for autos, they're going to similarly have an inclusions process where domestic manufacturers will nominate products by HTS code for inclusion under the Section 232 tariff. So we're seeing an expansion of the tariff umbrella. And again, here's the stacking order. It's complicated. I'm happy to talk about this after I finish the slides. So let's move on. Yep, and I mentioned, the other investigations. So normally under Section 232 investigation, the government has 270 days maximum to finish its investigation. For this administration, they're trying to do things much faster. We keep hearing that they want to wrap up the semiconductor investigation and deliver the report by July 9th or, sometime in July. So again, the scope we don't really know what the scope is aside from what I'm indicating here, because that was in the Federal Register notice. So downstream products with semiconductor content, that could be anything that has a semiconductor in it, any product. I mean, that's a massive amount of trade. So again, is it the content or is it the finished good? We just don't know. The president has been saying he wants to put tariffs on all downstream electronics products. So is Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary. Is it going to be 25%? Maybe. But, steel and aluminum now is 50%. They could go higher, potentially. We just don't know. So it's still a tremendous amount of uncertainty for our sector. For at least that $338 billion worth of imports, they have some certainty that they don't get exposed to the IEEPA tariffs for a time, but eventually they're going to get hit. And critical minerals is even tougher because there's a Department of the Interior, USGS, like US Geospatial Service list, or Geological Survey, US Geological Survey list of critical minerals that entered the Federal Register in 2022. And all those products are covered under this action. And so, think about every time a critical mineral is in a consumer technology product, there's critical minerals in almost any manufactured goods potentially. And it would be very, very difficult for any company to ascertain the value of the critical mineral in their import, especially if it's in minute amounts. And for a small business, this would be very, very difficult and costly. And so ultimately, if we're trying to move de-risk away from China, imposing tariffs on critical minerals, whether it's just the minerals themselves or in downstream products coming from third countries that are not China, that is not, in my view, not helpful in terms of our ability to de-risk from China. It makes it much, much more difficult. So let's move on. And yeah, I'm not going to dwell on this. There's lots of other investigations: copper, lumber, timber, and derivative products, aircraft and jet engines, and their replacement parts, trucks and truck parts, because the autos tariffs didn't cover medium and heavy duty trucks. They launched another investigation. So we could see future investigations as well. And I think I keep hearing they're going to move quickly on copper and lumber and timber. Those are the first investigations they launched after imposing the tariffs on autos and auto parts and steel and aluminum. So there are other Section 301 investigations beyond, the longstanding set of actions against China. The one on shipbuilding, as we're calling it, is they've already concluded the investigation. They've put out proposed actions. They've agreed on proposed actions. Actually, just this week, USTR announced some changes to those proposed actions and is seeking additional comment from stakeholders. So we were very concerned, and we still are, about the impact of these fees on imports coming into the United States. And this is about almost tariffing a service. If you think about transport, it's a service as opposed to a good. And the goal of these fees it's to ensure that in the future, more imports coming to the United States and exports leaving the United States are using U.S. flag ships built in the United States. And so this is going to take a very long time. We're not going to be able to stand up a shipbuilding industry anytime soon. I tend to think that some of the negotiations with our trading partners, like that have great shipbuilding capacity, like Korea and Japan, for example, are also concerned making investments in the United States in shipbuilding capacity to reduce reliance on China. So this is something that we're paying close attention to, especially as costs rise for shipping. And if over time it becomes more difficult to use ships built in the PRC, you may see less availability on other ships that are not built in the PRC, and therefore shipping rates could rise. So this is something we're paying very close attention to. Next one, Anders. And there's also a legacy Section 301 investigation for the Biden administration on chips. The Biden administration started this before the Trump administration came into office, and the Trump USTR team decided to continue it along with a shipbuilding one. And we've commented on this. We've testified at a hearing on this. And again, this is about China's quest for dominance in the production of legacy chips that are included in downstream products. It's not just critical industries. They're included in almost any consumer technology product. There are a lot of leading edge chips in consumer technology products, but also a tremendous number of legacy chips. And so CTA did issue we did perform research on this and put out a white paper. It's on our website to try to look at the prevalence of legacy chips in consumer technology products, where they're produced, which product segments are using chips from which country. So we've given this to the government, to USTR, to the Commerce Department, and to other agencies. And we've provided to folks on the Hill as well. And, this is a very complicated situation. I don't know how this is going to match. Like, if USTR comes to a conclusion on China under this investigation, how that matches what BIS is trying to do on its Section 232 investigation on semiconductors and downstream products in electronic supply chain. They're going to have to make them work together in some way, and we just really don't know what they're going to do. We haven't gotten any tea leaves from USTR on where they're going, but I think they will do a very good job of sorting through stakeholder comment and considering it I don't have the same confidence in BIS. I don't think they're going to read a lot of the comments that were submitted, and they're going to be far more cursory because they just don't have the staff to do it. And I think they're under a very different political timeline. So let's move on. So what is CTA doing in response to all this? So we've done a tremendous amount of media work. Both Gary Shapiro, our CEO, who's constantly out there, doing video interviews. We've done numerous Gary op-eds in the press. I've done a tremendous amount of press. Like I can't remember a period of my career where I've done so much press since really the election last year, and that includes radio, that includes live TV, a lot of print interviews. We're just going out and speaking at conferences where we can, and just getting our message out there. I can say confidently we are the most vocal association on tariffs in Washington, and we're saying things respectfully, but we're not shying away from it because we think this is just not the right step forward for the United States as a country to put up walls of tariffs around our country, which is just not good in the long run. We are also continuing to do a lot of Hill outreach. We've supported legislation on reclaiming congressional authority on tariffs, the Trade Review Act of 2025. There's a Senate version sponsored by Senators Cantwell and Grassley, and then there's also a House version. We've gotten behind both of them. We've gotten behind two different efforts to disapprove the IEEPA tariffs, both with respect to Canada, which the Senate passed but was dead on arrival in the House, and then there was another effort in the Senate that failed. It was 49-49, and this was on the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs. And the only reason it failed is because, number one, Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island just happened to be in Korea that day and couldn't take the vote. And then Mitch McConnell just wasn't available to vote for some reason. I'm not clear to me why. This is a privileged resolution, so the next time it can come up for a vote is in 6 months. And so we anticipate that the sponsors are going to try again. And same with the IEEPA fentanyl tariffs for Canada. The sponsors of that are going to make another run at this. We continue to do a lot of administration outreach with the White House, USTR, Commerce, Treasury, DHS, CBP. I would include State Department here. We've got remarks from a State Department official for our members next week. And we're going to be pivoting towards advocacy for a market opening trade agenda, to capitalize on all these negotiations. And it's really about U.S. technology leadership, innovation, and competitiveness. We signed a multi-association letter on this, as did WITSA earlier this year, and we want to turn that letter into more detail, particularly on supporting the diversification of supply chains away from China. We've been working with a lot of think tanks and talking to people in the academic world and just trying to build out our relationships there and trying to support as many studies as we can that look at the benefits of free trade and the harm of the administration's tariffs. And we're constantly talking to experts, and we'll be doing more of that as the year progresses. We had our first ever trade week. This is a trade-specific fly-in for CTA the first week of May, and this was a resounding success. We had, I think, 22 member companies participate. We met with 30 individual offices on the Hill, in the Senate, in the House. We had a briefing for Hill staff. We did a big reception at our Innovation House. We did a media roundtable for some of our small business members, and we just got the message out. We had a tremendous amount of press engagement that week because of the lobby day and the entire trade week, and also because of the output we issued, a big new study on the impact of tariffs on our industry, and then all the white papers I mentioned. So we've got to keep up the drumbeat on all of this through the rest of the year, and we're going to be identifying additional opportunities over the course of the next 6 months. So, Anders, one more slide, I think. And then we've been submitting comments wherever possible, not on every opportunity because some of them don't make sense for us, but you can see the list here, both comments to the government, statements on the Hill, testimony to the government. These are the reports we've issued. So, this is, yeah, there's a lot we're doing at this point. So I think I'll stop there, Anders, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that for detailed overview of what is a very, very complex trade regimen. So if everybody understood everything you're saying, I'll be very impressed. I think it's a lot, and I really appreciate you making sense of this. So let me get off the slides here, and then we'll invite anybody from the audience to ask questions by raising hands, perhaps. Does anybody have any questions?
Alexander.
Alex?
Yes, hello. Hello, Ed. Thank you very much for this very, very interesting and amazingly updated presentation. It's a very quick question regarding multilateral tools and the multilaterality. How do you see the role and how is the administration focusing on this other front?
So the administration so far is saying that they still support the WTO, but need to have it reformed. They're not saying that the United States needs to exit the WTO. And I think that is a good posture at the moment. Now, the nominee for the U.S. ambassador to the WTO is a person named Joseph Barloon, and he served as a general counsel at USTR during the first Trump administration. And he is a respected trade expert at this point. I think there is trust in him as a reliable hand at the wheel in the Geneva office for USTR. Now, that being said, he's still going to take an America First approach at the WTO, and he's going to defend the administration's tariffs at the WTO. There are many dispute settlement claims against the tariffs, whether it's the 232 tariffs or the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs. He's going to have to defend all of that as well. So I think for multilateralism, it's tough for the Trump administration to be multilateral. They don't like it. It's not instinctive to the president. He prefers bilateral negotiations. They think they have more leverage and power. It's I don't know where they're going to go in the multilateral world. The one thing I do know is that for now, anyway, they are standing up for the e-commerce moratorium. However, I don't know if they're going to stand up for that at the continuation of the e-commerce moratorium at the WTO ministerial conference next year, or whether they're just going to have moratoria in individual agreements that they reach with countries. Unclear. It's very murky still, Alex.
Thank you, Ed.
Any other questions? While we're waiting for questions, I got a quick one for you, Ed. So, a lot of people are anticipating, with the IEEPA tariffs and whether they are going to, whether the CIT decision is going to stand, and then even through the Supreme Court. And a lot of people are obviously hopeful that that's going to happen. And as you mentioned in your presentation, the administration then is already undertaking a lot of Section 232 and, obviously 301 and the other mechanisms as well, where they can sort of fill in for whatever gap that the reciprocal tariffs under IEEPA, if that is not allowed of through the Supreme Court. But the question is, let's assume that they are pivoting fully to 232 and 301. Are there mechanisms that, what is the likelihood that 232 and 301 can be challenged, perhaps successfully as well.
Well,
It's
it
that,
might not just be 232 and 301, by the way.
yeah,
It could be
120 and
122, section 122. If you read the CIT decision
yeah.
carefully, and I recommend, if people are interested, I recommend reading it. It's a very good read. It is almost like a playbook for using another part of the Trade Expansion Act of 1970, or excuse me, the Trade Act of 1974, section 122, which concerns balance of payments crises. And what that allows for is that the president could declare a balance of payment emergency, and trade deficit would be that type of emergency, and then could impose a tariff, a universal tariff of up to 15% maximum for 150 days. And then the Congress would have to vote affirmatively to extend those tariffs after the 150 days. So there's a lot of process involved in terms of the investigation that the administration will have to undertake. It's very internal facing. There's no, I read through the statute again recently, and there's no language in there about engaging with stakeholders. For example, there's no requirement to seek public comment or to host public hearings. So Section 122 is something they definitely could do, but again, it's much more process oriented and untested. There's another statute called Section 338, and this goes back to 1930s. And I've heard that the administration is looking at this as well. It's about countries that are impinging on the U.S. commerce and in an unfair way. So they would have to undertake country-specific investigations, which is very similar to what you would do under Section 301. So I don't know what the distinction is, but there's just less detail around that statute that might give them a bit ability to move a bit more quickly. So 301, that lawsuit against the 301 tariffs is still in the federal circuit. It has not budged. I think we could see more action later this year, but my feeling is that the government could win again, and maybe it gets appealed to the Supreme Court. We'll find out, but that has been at a snail's pace. 232, every 232 lawsuit ultimately failed at the appellate level. The federal circuit sided with the government. Like there were CIT decisions that found with plaintiffs, and then the federal circuit overturned. Yeah.
But the Section 122, that in Congress after the 150 days, that would be subject to a filibuster, right? I mean, that's not budget reconciliation, so that would face a huge hurdle in the Senate.
It'd be a big hurdle. I think the Congress, I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
But the Congress may not agree to extend that tariff.
Yeah.
There might be enough concerns amongst Republicans, about extending the tariffs that they would vote against extension. But then again, that'd be a very, very tough vote for them politically. The president would go after them. But the margins in the House and the Senate are very thin. That would be, if they used 122, there would be a massive, massive lobbying effort by industry against extension.
But to overcome filibuster, they would have to get a whole bunch of Democrats on the side as well.
Yeah. So, but there are procedural ways to deal with this. Like who knows? But that's neither here nor there at this point. It's an option.
Yeah. Right. Any other questions?
No questions.
I will be waiting. I have one question for you. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about your Reuters webinar coming up in an hour?
Oh yeah. So, well, this week I spent some time at the Reuters Events Supply Chain USA conference in Chicago. I moderated a panel, series of roundtables, a tariff hackathon, and then I'm moderating a discussion at a Reuters Events webinar coming up, and I'll put the link into the chat at 11 o'clock. So I'm on, I gotta make sure I keep my voice intact for all this, Anders. But I'll put the link into the chat if you want to hear me again. But I'm moderating this time, so there's three great experts. We have an advisor to the WTO, Sophie Lily Weinstein, and then a global procurement vice president from Thermo Fisher Scientific, Manuel Berdiz, and then the president and chairman of the Prestige Economics, the Futurist Institute, Jason Schenker. And I think this is going to be a very lively discussion based on the prep call I had.
Excellent. Now, before we forget, we promised a quick update on the AI diffusion rule. And my question is, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, that was obviously revoked just days before it was supposed to go into effect in May. And there's a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty now. What's going on? Are these diffusion rules going to be replaced? Is something else coming out? And my question is, with the preliminary deal now with China and the issue with the critical minerals and so on, is it likely that Trump is not going to pursue another version of the diffusion rule, primarily to avoid retaliation on minerals? Or, anyways, what have you heard about the diffusion rules? Is there going to be a replacement for this?
Yeah, I think there is going to be a replacement, but it's not going to look. It'll look very different. It'll look very different from what the Biden team did, and they're nowhere near having a replacement ready for it.
Right. So this is going to take up, past the summer and beyond. Yeah.
Yes.
And we don't really have any good information about what it's going to look.
I mean, I tend to think it's going to be like the mirror image of what they're doing with the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs. It'll be set up like a country by country process, like negotiating with each country on what it's going to do to prevent U.S. AI technology from landing in the wrong hands.
Right. Interesting. Any other questions before we let Ed go and get ready for his webinar? If not, Ed, I really appreciate the update and look forward to continuing discussions with you, and good luck with your webinar, and I hope some of us will be able to join in.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. We'll make the slides available. Anders has them.
I will do. No problem. I will share with the participants. Thank you so much, guys.
So much, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.